One of the challenges of incorporating goal attainment scaling into your clinical practice is that there's still some disagreement over how exactly it should be implemented. I mean, it's only been around for 50 or 60 years. It's not been widely used. So there's still some inconsistencies in how different people implement it. One controversy or disagreement is where to start the client. So some clinicians or investigators will start the client at 0. Uh, the problem with this is that in clinical practice, we generally expect the client either to not change or improve. So this is really compressing the scale. -1 and -2 should be extremely rare. So now your whole goal attainment scale is, for the most part, between 0 and 2. Uh, Other clinicians start their client at -1, which allows for some regression, right? So it leaves open the possibility your client might get worse. The challenge here is that if you have a client who doesn't reach the expected outcome, you're 0, but does improve, you have no place to categorize them other than -1, which is where people who don't improve at all are going to wind up. So you can't show, you lose that ability to show the that intermediate level of improvement towards the expected goal. So what I recommend is starting the client at -2. So that's how I've instructed you in these videos. This does create the possibility of a floor effect, right? So if you really believe clients can regress, can wind up worse than they were when they started, then this is not a great approach for you. Another debate is over whether goals should be weighted. So if a client has multiple goal attainment scaling goals, some investigators have assigned a weight to each of those goals. I do not. I recommend not using the weighting, mostly because goal attainment scale, even though we assign numbers from -2 to +2, they aren't real numbers. So multiplying them by a weight doesn't actually make sense. Beyond that, there's no good standard procedure for assigning the weights. So it's just another level of uncertainty that you don't need. So I recommend not weighting the goals. Building on that, in general, this idea of what do you do with these numbers? Goal attainment scaling was originally designed as a scale from -2 to +2 because they wanted to treat them as numbers, but they're really not. You can imagine replacing the -2 to +2 with letters A through E, right? And if you do that, multiplying A by a weight or adding A and C doesn't make sense, right? So treat these as ordinal values, so categories that have an order but aren't actual numbers. That being said, you can still do some kinds of group analysis with goal attainment scale scores. So if you have 50 clients and you want to find out, well, what was on average, how did we do? You can get that information. If you try 2 different interventions and want to use goal attainment scales to compare the outcomes between those 2 groups, you can do that. The way that you get the average kind of score is to use the median instead of the mean. And the way to compare groups of clients is to use the Mann-Whitney test instead of a t-test. Both of these accommodate ordinal values and still let you do those group comparisons. Uh, T-scores. So one of the issues, one of the original design principles of goal attainment scaling was this use of this T-score to calculate either a weighted or unweighted score for your client over all of their different goals. And the idea was that if the score was close to 50, there was no change, and the further away from 50 showed either improvement towards the goals or a lack of achievement of the goals. I do not at all recommend T-scores. Stay away from the T-scores. So to summarize, if you want to combine goal attainment scale scores, don't use T-scores. If you want to measure goal attainment scale scores for a client, so maybe you've taken three different goals, three different scales for a client, use the median. If you want to find out how a bunch of clients did on average, use the median of their goal attainment scale scores. If you want to compare groups of clients, use the Mann-Whitney U-test to compare the median scores between the groups. Finally, there's issues with whether, or concerns about whether this is a valid and reliable measure. So inter-rater reliability can be strong. Content validity can be high, and criterion validity not so much. So inter-rater reliability, as long as your measures are well defined, then inter-rater reliability can be strong. Content validity. So again, as long as your measures are well defined and relevant to the client's goals and behaviors, content validity can be high. Criterion validity, that's comparing goal attainment scaling to some other gold standard. And realistically, if you've got some other gold standard, then use that. Don't use goal attainment scaling, right? So the point of goal attainment scaling is that you use it when there's not another well-defined, widely accepted gold standard that you can use instead.